Good afternoon. Welcome to our third of the four webinars we're doing around board innovation and board education. It's great to be here. For those who don't know me, I'm Aaron Thompson, the president of the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education, and I'm welcoming a big group today for a very special guest that we're happy to have. But I want to just take a second to recognize you and thank you for joining this webinar. I mean, it is important that we all know the importance that boards play in us attaining what we need to attain in this state around economic development, workforce participation, workforce preparation, and more than anything else, just a good quality education. So thank you for being here and thank you for doing what you're doing. Now, I'm also proud to say that I get to introduce a person that's going to introduce our guest here in a second. This person is my boss, believe it or not, and he lets me know that often. He tells me, but he's the chair of our board, Madison Silvert. Now, Madison has been with us for several years and has been the chair of CPE since last January, and I just want to tell you a little bit about him before I let him take over this webinar. He is currently the president of the Malcolm Bryant Corporation, and prior to that, he was the president of the Greater Owensboro Economic Development Corporation. And today's webinar, he knows a little bit about. So he's had a lot of experiences around accreditation, and especially with SACS COC. So, and the person he's getting ready to introduce you to, he and she are good friends as well as I am. So it's my pleasure, Madison, to welcome you to this webinar, and I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that introduction. This is such an important topic for CPE and for all of our boards, and for everyone in particular in higher education in the state of Kentucky, and in fact around the country, because we're going to talk about quality. And Aaron talked about the importance of education to our workforce, to economic development, to education for education's sake, which we don't talk about nearly enough, but to make sure that all of those things are delivered in a quality manner. And boy, do we have somebody here today who can help us talk about the importance of ensuring quality in our institutions, ensuring quality in the education that they deliver, and ensuring quality outcomes for our students through accreditation. Today we have with us Dr. Belle Wheelan. Dr. Wheelan currently serves as president of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. Always make sure that you add that COC, right, Dr. Wheelan? She is the first African-American and the first woman to serve in this capacity. Her career spans over 40 years, includes the roles of faculty member, chief student services officer, campus provost, college president, and the Virginia Secretary of Education. She has received numerous awards and recognition, including 6 honorary degrees, and has held membership in numerous local, state, and national organizations. Dr. Wheelan, I'm so glad you could join us today. I had such an incredible experience during my terms on the SACS COC board and executive council. And I'm so glad that you could be with us today.
It's my pleasure. Appreciate the invitation.
Dr. Wheelan, we really want to make sure that we lay a solid foundation for today's topic. Not everybody who's on the webinar today, they certainly have heard of SACS COC, but whether or not they really understand the purposes of accreditation and why they as board members need to know about and understand the accreditation process. Tell us a little bit about accreditation.
Sure. First, let me thank you for your service to our board. We miss you, and you can come back anytime.
Thank you.
Accreditation started back in the late 1800s when colleges were trying to make sure that the general public understood the difference between a high school diploma and a college degree. That seems kind of strange right now, given how many colleges there are across our country, but that's really how it started. Presidents got together and said, you know, we need to make sure that people understand the difference in the two certifications, and that we are doing what we're supposed to do at a college level to ensure that folks are prepared to go out into the real world. And so the New England Association started first with Harvard and Boston College and all of them. Our accrediting body was the third to be founded in 1865. And we've been going strong ever since. We currently operate out of 11 states with over 780 members, and we have some international members. And the purpose of them is to make sure that institutions are preparing our students, that they provide a quality product for students who enroll. It's a continuous improvement process as well. Just once you get accreditation, you're not accredited forever and ever, amen. You have to demonstrate that you're continuing to improve your processes, that students are continuing to be successful as they're leaving your institutions. And so it is a peer review process. My staff and I manage the process in that we ensure that there are enough volunteers to go out and that there are policies in place and things like that. But it is a peer review process. People who are employed at institutions similar to those being visited are the ones who make recommendations to a board that is elected by those peers. And so I tell people I really appreciate all the hospitality that I'm shown anytime I go to an institution, but I don't get a vote. I'm paid staff. I'm not a volunteer anymore. When I was employed with different institutions, I was a peer, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am, because I had been involved in the process. But it is truly a peer review process, unique in the in the country. But I tell people too that sometimes if you think of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, they're the quality control for food and drugs. We're the quality control for higher education.
Well, we know that sometimes that certainly can be a process that needs to be demystified a little bit. And yes. I'd say probably particularly from the role of the governing board as it relates to the SACS COC review process. And we know that there is a process to review specifically the role of the governing board. What are some of the principles that are considered during that review process?
There are 14 different areas that committees review when they go into an institution. And even prior to the review, every institution has to submit what we call a compliance certification. Back in the day, it was called the self-study, where they have to look at our standards and document that they believe they're in compliance with our standards. And there are 14 different areas or standards, though there are over 80 specific standards. One of those standards is governing board. Because the governing board sets policy, and the governing board hires the president or the chancellor, and the governing board has the fiduciary responsibility of the institution. We want to make sure that they're doing their job as well. And so there are only 3 standards, if you will, but of those 3 standards, there are like 20 parts to them. We have to make sure that there's the board has the legal authority to govern the institution. And so we'll come in and look at the original paperwork or legislation that established the institution and subsequently the board. We want to make sure that the board members are free of conflicts of interest. And sometimes that gets to be a little dicey, because it may not be a real conflict, but it could be a perceived conflict. The whole purpose of having a board is to make sure that the institution is protected from all kinds of external influences, including the perception that board members are making decisions that will benefit them. And so we look at conflict of interest policies. If you are chair of the board, for example, you can't have a family member who's employed at the institution because it looks like the decisions that you as the board chair might make would benefit your family. And so, it's things like that. We want to make sure that there's an evaluation process of the board. One of the last standards that was added was that boards actually evaluate themselves and their own effectiveness. Do you know what your role is? Are you carrying that role out? We want to make sure that the board is not controlled by a handful of people, that it really is a board that is making the decision and not just a small group of the people who are there. We want to make sure that board members understand the difference between governing an institution and administering an institution. That you don't try to tell the president how to do their job. You tell them what you want done, but you pay them good money to actually get it done. And while there may be some suggestions that can come from the board, that presidents have to feel free to take that under advisement, as it were, and not necessarily have to do what it is that they're suggesting. That there's a process for dismissing board members. Just because you're on a board doesn't mean you can stay on a board. If there are situations that arise that suggest that either there's a conflict or your behavior is not appropriate to serve on the board, then there's got to be a fair and honest process by which, and legitimate reasons for for terminating the term of the board. So those are the kinds of things that we review when we come in to look at the board.
Well, I know one of the things that you and I looked at together once was this idea of the board's bylaws and the way that they're constituted and operated they've got to jive, right?
Right.
If you're not operating according to those bylaws. Tell me a little bit about the importance of good bylaws in the SACS COC review process.
Well, we had a situation in the Commonwealth of Kentucky where the bylaws had not been updated to reflect legislation that had been passed. And so when a decision was made, it appeared as though the legislature and the governor were overstepping their bounds. There was undue influence there, when the reality was, had the board updated their bylaws, then the committee coming in would have known that this was a legitimate action on behalf of the governor. So it's very important that they be reviewed regularly. When a team comes in, they look at board minutes to see, motions that were made and the conversation that was had on a particular topic. They look to see that the budget is reviewed regularly, that the strategic plan had involvement with board members when it was developed. So while there is a section on governing boards, there is expectation that the board's going to other 13 areas as well, because fiduciary responsibility is one of those. Health and safety of the students is one of those. And the policies that the board puts in place impacts all of those kinds of things. And so it is important when a team comes in, they actually will interview board members to make sure that they know what their role is, that they've been carrying out their role, that they understand the process of accreditation and what's involved in it. And so while there's one specific area on governing boards, their involvement is not limited to those as far as our standards are concerned.
Yeah, and in my experience, Dr. Wheelan, context matters so much, and the board being able to provide minutes and understanding of why decisions are made and why they're consistent with bylaws, for example, being able to provide that context to SACS COC seems to really matter in the review process.
It does indeed, because like I said, we want to make sure that everybody understands their role. I tell boards when I come to visit with them that, the administration travels down a path and the board travels down a path, and they're running side by side. And it's when they start crossing over, that it becomes disconcerting. And so we have to go back and say, okay, what happened? Why did this happen? We have a situation right now where we've got some board members that I want to say, why didn't you just apply to be president, since you are, hell bent on doing the job that you hired the president to do. But I've stopped short of saying that out loud anyway. But I do ask that question to myself sometimes. Because sometimes, I have been both a board member and a president. And so I understand both roles. And when you are a successful business person and you've got good ideas, you want to be able to, share those ideas. And that's fine. I haven't met a president yet who has not been appreciative of some of those ideas. But when you as a board member start mandating that presidents do things the way you want them to do, that gets to be, a little messy. And is just not something that we think is appropriate in higher education. That might work in business, but that's just not the way we do business in higher education. And as long as we have the standards that differentiate those two roles, then I'm afraid we hold institutions and board members responsible for living within them.
One of the concepts that I had to learn quickly that demystified SACS COC for me was the difference between I've been out of compliance, but I'm in compliance now.
Sure.
And those kinds of situations where for a board it can start to get messy if you've got some board members who are starting to micromanage the university, micromanage the presidency. And if that's happened in the past, but something has happened administratively that's kind of put a stop to it, how would SACS COC view that? Would they see you as out of compliance because you used to be, but now you're in compliance?
No, it's a what's going on right now kind of thing, more than anything. When we go through the reaffirmation process, which occurs once every 10 years, there are 3 different opportunities where institutions can update the information and give more current information, so that because it's a continuous improvement process, we would hope that institutions would continue to improve. So that compliance certification that I talked about is submitted. There is a group of their peers who review it. They give feedback to say, we agree you're in compliance here. We don't agree you're in compliance here. I can't figure out whether you're in compliance or not here. And that's sent back to the president of the institution, who has an opportunity to respond to that and provide additional information. Those 2 pieces of information then are given to the committee that's coming to the institution to visit, what we call the on-site committee. And so they get a chance to review and say, oh, okay, well, you were out of compliance when the offsite committee reviewed it, but now that you've given this additional information, now you're in compliance. So this is a good thing. They write up a report. If they find things that are still out of compliance, they will let the board know. And the president, again, has an opportunity to say, well, we've cleaned this up. The board met. We put this policy in place, kind of thing. So that's the good news I think, about the reaffirmation process. When I first became involved with the process many years ago, it was you turn in your self-study and you hold your breath until you know how the board voted. To believe that if this is a continuous improvement process, then institutions need to have opportunities to continue to improve. And so I think it's a better process. Now, that's once every 10 years when you go through reaffirmation. We don't just leave you alone for 10 years, unfortunately. If we have a 5th year report that institutions have to submit, so that we can kind of go, all right, this is where you were 5 years ago. How's it working for you now? And then where do you think you're going with the next reaffirmation, to kind of help institutions get ready for the next cycle? There have been times in the past when institutions would wait until year 8 of a 10-year cycle to try to get ready. And then there were things they could not fix in 2 years, like finances, for example. Mm-hmm. So the 5th year report gives them a chance to kind of catch up and start getting ready for the next reaffirmation cycle. If someone files a complaint about an institution or something that's going on there, and that complaint is accreditation related, then we come in again and we'll say, here's a complaint that came in. Tell us what's going on. What have you done? Is this real? Are they misinterpreting what's going on? I tell people that all of my institutions are still in the United States, where you're innocent until proven guilty. And so we don't assume that just because a complaint comes in that the institution institution has messed up. We do ask the institution, you know, to tell us what's going on. Sometimes they'll have to say, yeah, well, at the time this happened, this is really what we did, but now we've put this policy in place, or, you know, we've unfortunately fired this person, and, you know, things are back on track now. The other time that we get involved is if stuff hits the media. We have what we call an unsolicited information policy that because we are required to assure that institutions are in compliance with our standards at all times, then if stuff comes up in the media, we have to investigate and find out, you know, what's going on. So we will send a letter to the president saying, you know, the Louis St. whatever the newspaper is in the local community published this article and suggest that, you know, this is something going on. We have this standard that says you're not supposed to be out of compliance. Tell us how you're still in compliance. And then determinations are made whether, you know, this is something that will jeopardize the accreditation or whether everything's okay and we move forward. So we're constantly touching our institutions, as it were. Much to their chagrin sometimes, I'm sure. But again, our role is to ensure that they are, you know, doing what they say they're going to do all the time. The bigger piece that, and this has been going on since we first started back, you know, in the late 1800s. In the mid 1950s, when the federal government was trying to determine how to determine which institutions to give GI Bill money, they recognized that the accreditors were out there already assuring, you know, compliance. So we partner with the federal government. And if an institution has accreditation, then they can avail themselves of Title IV funds. They can get federal financial aid. They can get Pell Grant. And so there are some of our standards that are actually mandated by the federal government because of the partnership that we have in place. And sometimes we don't make a distinction when we print our standards to say which is a federal policy and which is, you know, our policy. It doesn't matter. They're compliance standards to which you must demonstrate compliance. And so they'll get very upset with us sometimes when we say, well, why do we have to? Well, the reality is you have to do that because you're getting federal funds. And they want to make sure that, you know, you're living in within the standards in order to feel comfortable giving you that money.
You know, it's so easy, I think, to fall into the trap of looking at SACS COC as an organization that's, you know, that's kind of out to over-examine and get, you know, be the I'm the government and I'm here to help you kind of organization, right? Even though it's not a governmental organization, but that kind of attitude, rather than a partner that's there to help you make better and ensure success. And I think at CPE, we look at ourselves that way. We want to ensure the success of post-secondary education throughout the Commonwealth, and SACS COC does with all their members. You know, tell us a little bit about how you partner to make institutions better.
One of the things that we did, what we do every 10 years is to do a deep dive into our standards to make sure that we're still considering the right things when we go in to evaluate a student. We library books per discipline, because our members said that if a student is going to write a term paper, they need to have original sources in the library. And so back in the day, we would actually count library books per discipline to make sure that there was an adequate supply. Then everything went online. What are we going to count? You know, I don't know how to count bytes of information. And so, you know, we got rid of that standards. Of recent, there was a concern by the federal government that students were borrowing money and weren't paying it back. And they were talking about penalizing institutions by taking away subsequent financial aid because students in previous classes didn't pay their loans back. So I asked the question, help me understand, if it's the federal government who decides how much money a student gets, and it's the federal government who determines in the first place which students get money, why is it the institution's fault that the students don't pay the money back? That makes no sense to me. But what does make sense is that we can help students understand what happens when you borrow money, and don't pay it back. because for many of our students, a student loan is the first time they've ever had a big bucket of money. And they just think, oh, wow, I've got money. I can go buy a TV and a car and, all this kind of stuff. When the reality is you can borrow that money, but it does have to be paid back. And if you don't pay it back, there's this thing called compound interest. And they don't understand that. And so we put in a standard that now requires our institutions to provide financial literacy to students, something that they should have had in middle school, but didn't get, certainly in high school, but didn't get, but now they're here. And so we want to make sure they get it. And I have to tell you, our research is showing that since we put that standard in, that the student loan default rate has declined in our region because students understand they have to pay that money back. So that's why when we look at our standards, we try to see what's going on. We're in the process of getting ready for our annual meeting next week, and our members will be asked to vote on some changes in the standards that, will accommodate some of the things that have gone on. We're looking at credentials and micro-credentials and, what is our role? Because many of the micro-credentials that are offered in higher ed are offered in continuing education, and we don't evaluate continuing education. But there's got to be a way that we can look at the credentials before they come over to the credit side of the house for the quality that was involved there. So every time something pops up, the topic du jour, we have to make sure, that our institutions are going to provide a quality, whatever that topic du jour is, in its offerings.
Yeah, two important things there that I want to make sure that our attendees hear and understand. One is not only do we require, or does SACS COC require that 10-year reaffirmation, but you really do that of yourselves. You go, you do that deep dive into the standards, and I was on the executive committee last time we did that deep dive, and it is thorough, and it is very thorough, and really make sure that the standards are relevant. But then the other thing is when you're adopting those new standards, I think of the financial literacy one that you mentioned. It's a great example of how to set a strategic direction, but not micromanage. The same thing that we require of boards of trustees, because we set that standard out there, but very broad latitude as to what that meant as far as delivering financial literacy education.
Another example is with faculty qualifications. We used to require that anybody who teaches a college course has to have a master's degree and 18 graduate hours in whatever the subject matter was. And then IT came along. And there is no master's degree, or at least that time was no master's degree in IT. You could major in computer science, but that was not information technology. And so our members said, what are we going to do? I've got to hire somebody who's going to do this, but they can't meet the qualifications. And then some of the other areas said, yeah, the same thing here. We don't have and so now our standard says the institution has to make a case for what makes their faculty members qualified. And if they're not going to use academic qualifications, they've got to find something that justifies, their expertise in the area. So honors and awards that they've gotten, or a plumber who's had, 20-year successful business, didn't go bankrupt, would be so, something out there that demonstrate that this person is qualified to do the job. That is probably the one standard with which our institutions have the most difficulty, because they are so accustomed to just using that master's and 18 graduate hours. And I can reaffirmation because their adjunct faculty will call and say, I just was told that my contract won't be renewed because I don't have a master's in it, and it's your fault. And I'm said, you go back and tell them that they're full of stuffings, that we no longer require that, but you got to have something to show that you're qualified to, to teach. So we try to change regularly. I've been in this business, you kind of have to say my career spans over 40 years. This is actually my 50th year in higher education this year. So I've been around a while, and I remember when we had over 400 compliance statements which we had to demonstrate compliance, and now we're down to like 86. So we have indeed made changes over the years, and we have gotten less prescriptive. Because, our institutions all have different missions. They offer different levels of credentials. They have different different amounts of resources that are available. And so to have a literally black or white, finite kind of thing just does not work. And we recognize that. And so we like to think that we're not quite as prescriptive, and we're not, as we used to be. And we've also, over the 19 years that I've been in this position, I've tried very hard to help my staff understand that we are not the out to get yous. We are a support system for our institutions, and our role is to make sure that they have all they need to ensure the success of their students. And it's working.
It is. Before we go on to the next topic, I want to make sure that all of our attendees know that if you go down to the Q&A section, we're going to reserve some time at the end to take some questions. We already have one there that I noticed, but if you want to just type those in, we'll try to get to those in the order that they were received. One of the top priorities of the CPE board is ensuring success for every student. Can you talk a little bit about the student success issues that are considered during a review process?
Yeah, there are several of them. One is looking at the actual curriculum that is offered and asking if you have students who aren't quite ready to take on college level work, is there some way that you can help them get ready for that? Whether it's a formal developmental education program or group of courses through which they have to matriculate, or do you have the appropriate support services in place, like tutors and learning labs and all of the kinds of supports that students might need in order to get there? We look at mental health counseling, which you may not think has anything to do with student success, but it truly does. I mean, if a student is having difficulty with life, then they're going to definitely have difficulty getting through any kind of coursework that you have. We look at financial aid to see that they've got money available, and if they don't qualify for federal money, is there local scholarship money available, and how are you using that scholarship money? We look at the role of faculty, and as I said, the qualifications that they have, but also, how many hours are they actually putting in with students versus serving on committees versus doing research versus whatever pieces of the mission they are they also there to provide support for students? We look at the facilities that go in, and does a student have the technology necessary in today's day and age to prepare them for life after college? Is there also technology available to prepare them for college life? To be able to matriculate through a curriculum that you have there. We also look at the actual numbers of graduates and license passage, for like nursing and automotive technician or anything else that has a license that goes to it, to see how successful students are being. And then we go back and say, okay, how do you know students? First of all, what is it you expect students to know how to do? We have asked the institutions to have an assessment process where they can, first of all, identify the expectations of students. How do they define a successful student? Then assess whether that student is being successful or not. And then tell us what kinds of changes you're making in the institution based on that assessment data. We had one institution that looked at their graduation rates and found that students were not graduating, and they were trying to figure out why. And when they looked at their data, they found out that across the board, it was because they weren't doing well in the intro to math course. And so they went back and revamped that math course, and they asked faculty from all over the institution, what skill sets do students need to have when they come out of this intro to math course in order to be successful in your program? And they retrained in the learning lab for students to be able to study on their own. And after one semester, the grades improved tremendously and the retention rates improved tremendously. That process, worked so well that they did the same thing with the nursing and allied health programs in their anatomy and physiology course, because that's the weed out course, for those particular programs. So those are the kinds of things that we ask institutions to do. Let's look and see how successful your students are being. If they're not successful, what is it that you're doing? Because we know that life gets in the way as well. And sometimes it's the student that just, has issues that cannot be addressed by the institution. But, what is it that the institution can do to ensure the success of their students?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's the ball game, right? That's what we're
Yes,
here to do,
right.
and so we're so glad to have a partner like SACS COC to help us do that. So speaking of the importance of SACS COC, let me shift gears just a little bit. College accreditation has been a target in recent years. I don't know how deeply you want to get into that question, but here's a great opportunity to talk about what the threats are to accreditation and what it might mean if we didn't have the value of that partner anymore because of those threats. I think it's an important conversation.
Yeah, I'm okay. We we have at least two states within the region we serve that believes that the accreditor is the one that is causing problems. And they don't understand, I think, that the accreditor just manages the process, that the standards were developed by the members. And these are things that they feel are important. Those states feel that the states need to have the authority to do the kinds of things that historically accreditors have done. Controlling curriculum, looking at academic freedom, looking at shared governance, because those states fund those institutions, they feel that they should have, a bigger say. Forever, there have been what we call the triad of higher ed, which is the federal government with its financial aid, the state with its funding, and the accreditors ensuring the quality. Those lines are becoming blurred at this particular point, and we have at least two states that have decided that they want their institutions to go find another accreditor. They don't understand that they're going to run into the same standards with those other accreditors that they're running into with us, that those accreditors will question actions that their legislature takes. They will question actions that the local boards take, because those are things that all of higher education has decided is important in ensuring the success of an institution of higher ed. It happens that historically we have been organized geographically, but during the previous administration, there was a change made that said institutions can choose their accreditor. And so while no one voluntarily left, we at least have two states that have mandated that their institutions will leave. I don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the country. There seems to be a focus on changing the emphasis that higher ed has of controlling the curriculum, controlling the programs. When you look at the anti-DEI legislation, that was a part of that movement. When you look at academic freedom, and controlling that, all of that is part of it. And so, yeah, it's blowing up. It happens to have started, I think, in our region because we have at least one governor who wants to be president of the United States. And so his policies stepped out first, and others are following. Don't know what the end was.
I'm really glad you brought up the DEI example, because here's an example where those two states where their schools are being encouraged to go seek another accreditor are going to find it really interesting that SACS COC has guidelines when it comes to DEI, but every other accreditor, I think, has standards.
That's right.
Things that they must follow. And
Yep.
so they're actually going to be maybe a little more constricting when it comes to the hot button issue that might have caused it in the first place.
Possibility. And it's a question that I ask. I don't, I don't understand it. I don't, but it's happening. There was, timing is everything. Some of that legislation happened at the time we were, remember I mentioned that unsolicited information policy that we had?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Couple of events that occurred where we wrote letters and said, your media has produced this report and suggested that you're doing this. And I think they felt that we were being too intrusive. What they don't understand is all of the accreditors are going to be equally as intrusive. So we'll see what happens. The institutions are not happy at all, because it was not generated by them. It's supposed to have been a voluntary process. Even when the Trump administration put these rules in, it was defined as a voluntary process. This is not voluntary when the state legislatures mandate that they move. And so the institutions themselves are not happy about it at all, especially since it's the institutions that have created the accrediting bodies, and it's their standards, that they're following. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Well, one of the standards that I think SACS COC does so well that seems very, very strategic, and I would hope that most boards of trustees are involved in the conversation, and that's QEPs. What do board members need to know about what a QEP is, what their role is in helping to determine a QEP? I think we could talk about that for a few minutes.
The QEP is what we call the Quality Enhancement Plan, and it's the way that an institution as a whole focuses on student achievement. Basically. So when we say an institution as a whole, that includes the board members, the faculty members, the other administrators, students, to come up with a concept, possibly one that's already in their strategic plan, that says we want to ensure that 60% of our students are going to graduate within 6 years. What specifically are you going to do to make that happen? Wishing it is not going to make it so. The example I gave you about the math course was one institution's QEP. They looked at their data and found that it was the math course that was creating consternation for the students. Other institutions have looked at reading. There are students who come in that cannot read effectively at the college level. Being able to read is one thing, but being able to comprehend and use the knowledge that you develop is something else. Writing, being able to write appropriately, or such that people can actually understand what it is that you're talking about, is another one that folks do. But it's the idea of, here's something that we want to do in order to ensure that students are successful. And so we ask you to define the issue, assess the results, and then tell us the changes that you've made in the institutions as a result of that assessment data.
And do you think if you had an on-site committee that was at one of our universities and they were speaking to a few trustees and they asked them what they thought about the QEP, and the trustee had no idea what the main points of the QEP were, would that be surprising? Or
it would be surprising. It would be disappointing, because it would mean that the president had not kept the board informed. And I think it's important that the board stay informed, not just at the time when the committee's coming, but all through, the 10-year cycle. I tell presidents, you should be doing something in accreditation every year. There should be a focus of some sort. The student achievement data certainly is one of those. Making sure that there's professional development available for your faculty to make sure that they are qualified and continue to be qualified. That, you've looked at your student retention data to see, what's keeping students there, or what's keeping them from, what's causing them to leave. All of those kinds of things, believe it or not, are tied into the quality of the organization that the trustees are leading. And so they need to be apprised of all of these things all of the time, not just when a committee's coming in, but certainly when a committee is coming in.
Absolutely. I want to take a moment for a question. We've got a couple here. One of our attendees, Joe Heerdink, asks, in a recent CP post-secondary feasibility study, and you're probably aware that our legislature asked us to study several issues this year, and one of those was about the community college system. The question that came up was whether or not community colleges should offer basically 100 and 200 level courses that you would find at a typical 4-year institution, whether or not those should even be offered at the community college. And in the response that the draft of the response, at least that the CPE board got to look at recently, it was pretty clear that we thought those 100 and 200 level courses, for a multitude of reasons, need to remain at the Kentucky Community and Technical College system. But one of the things that we said might need to be studied further is whether or not KCTCS should really just do one accreditation, that it become one community college with multiple campuses and do one accreditation. And it was one of the things that came back from Ernst & Young that we hired as a suggestion of ways to improve efficiency and help KCTCS be more aligned together. And so Joe asked this question, what kind of role should a governance board have in that kind of consideration? Joe is staff elected KCTCS Board of Regents rep. And so, he's curious, what kind of role should that governing board have in that kind of decision? And what would you think about something like that? Because it was one of the suggestions that came back.
Yeah. The challenge that would exist that does not exist now is if you have one institution that is struggling, there's a good word, then just that institution struggles. But if that institution is now a part of one big institution, then that means everybody's struggling. And that's difficult to deal with because you can't really necessarily pinpoint where the issue is. So, there's nothing wrong with doing that. The Dallas County schools just did that. They had 9 separately accredited community colleges, and then they merged into one big institution. And it is a bureaucratic challenge, to say the least. So, I spent 28 years in community colleges and in lots of different structures. In Virginia, they have a state board that governs all 23 community colleges, but they have delegated some of their authority to the local college board. Valuation of the president is given to the local college boards. Some of the budgetary issues are delegated to the authority for them is delegated to the local board. So there's going to have to be, whether you have a big super board or not, there should be some local autonomy that is delegated down there. We even have a standard that says, if you're going to do that, we just want to know who's on first, who's responsible for what, what does the super board do? What does the local board do? How does stuff move up and down that particular process? So the bottom line is it can work. If I were a president, I wouldn't want it, but if I were a board member, I might.
Well, I appreciate that input so much because it's a real question, and and there were so many, these areas that we were asked to study were varied, and quite disparate, really, and so there were a lot of data points and things to look at. So I appreciate your input on that.
Yeah, well, among our institutions, Virginia would be the example for you to look at a statewide board that governs all of the community colleges and how it delegates the authority. We don't have any other states that do it that way, I don't think. South Carolina might. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll certainly look at those. I want to give you, if there was one message to deliver to our attendees today that maybe we haven't talked about today, I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity.
Well, I want to thank all of the trustees for all they do, because I know there are other things that they have to do in their life, and for them to give their times to ensure that the institutions are providing the services and the academic preparation for the students who enroll is a big deal, and I thank them for that. I think that I need them to know that we are not that our board members are employees of the institutions, and they are board members at different institutions, and the policies that we have and the practices we have are the best practices that our members feel that we should have. And don't get so upset when you see a question being asked, because we don't expect you to be perfect, but we do expect you to live within the standards that have been established.
Yeah, a SACS COC is a peer-reviewed, member-led organization, really there to ensure quality and make sure that all of our universities are doing their best. Dr. Wheelan, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I know time's valuable, and I know that you've got your annual meeting. I mean, I think you're turning this off and going straight to your annual meeting.
That's right. Me and 4,000 of my closest friends are about to gather here in Orlando.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And Dr. Thompson, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madison. Thank you, Dr. Wheelan. What a pleasure to have you here. As you all know, I would have normally liked to have joined you at your meeting, but I've been called to a Republican caucus meeting to discuss some of the same very things you all were discussing today. So I get the pleasure of doing that instead of hanging out with you.
Well, let us know if we can be of assistance, provide you any information.
Well, you already have. I know you need to go, but I just want to give you some kudos on many levels that a lot of folk wouldn't even know about. When we've had any questions to deal with anything in this state, whether it dealt with the governor's office, the legislative agenda, or our campuses, we've called you directly and you've answered us back within 5 minutes. I mean, that's just who you are. And for that, I consider you by far the most powerful of people like you in this nation. I know them all, so I can say that. So we appreciate you in Kentucky. We appreciate SACS COC, and we're glad that we are a part of SACS COC, all of our institutions. So we appreciate you, and
thank you.
Thank you. For the third one, we have one more coming up. We will be with the legislative panel this next time, and Heather will send you out information. But we're going to be talking about a variety of things. There's a lot of things that could affect higher education this next budget session. And so we're going to be talking about those. You'll get a chance to ask several of our legislators who have a lot to do with the way that we do higher education in the state, from funding to laws that could possibly pop up. I encourage you to be here and be ready to ask those questions. And you can see on the screen now, it's going to be December 14th. I will be asking them some of those questions, as I already have, but I know you will need to do that too. The one item I'll leave you with before we sign off, and I think it's important that I say this to you. We are going into a budget year, a legislative year. We're going to need your advocacy. If higher education matters, and we know it matters to you, or you wouldn't be in this position, we're going to have to talk about it as a collective. We're going to have to be a choir that learns how to sing better. So more than just having the knowledge that you're getting from these great experts, I ask that you use your knowledge in the place where you exist, not only for your campus, but also in your communities, to talk about the value of what we do. It's important. We got a 47.8% college going rate from our high school students to Kentucky. We have 5% more going out of state. Many of those are part of our brain drain. There's a whole lot of things we need to be working on our campus, is true enough. But there's also a footprint that we need to leave as higher education leaders. And I ask that you take part in that, to talk about the value proposition, obviously, of higher education, but moreover, to talk about why we are a strategic investment. So I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving, I should say, and I hope you have a wonderful time until we get together again in a couple of weeks. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.